innovative things around open banking. And we're very fortunate here to have Leda here, and I have her book. If anybody's interested in buying her book, Bankers Like Us, maybe you'll tell us a little bit about it as well. That would be brilliant. And we also have Mark here, who's going to give us a little bit more application in terms of what's happening at NatWest. So we've got this fireside chat now, the emerging role of banks in e-commerce for you. So over to you guys.
Center ourselves. Thank you so much. And thank you for having us today. Mark, I was very, very excited to meet you. You're one of the main reasons why I am here.
Well, I've come here to get your book. So,
well, there you are. We can both leave now. I have met you and you have a copy of my book. As the Chief Payment Officer of NatWest, obviously you're at the heart of this, but looking through your career, you've spent time at Amex, PayPal, you have been in the heart of emerging payments for a while. So obviously I want to hear about what you're doing today, but I want to start off by saying, we've been talking about this, open banking, the emergence of open finance, the imminent arrival of that transformative moment. We've been talking about it for a while, and as a practitioner, I've been part of a lot of interesting conversations. As a consumer, I have not seen a stampede. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Well, I think the starting point is open banking is a marathon. Changing consumer behavior and changing merchant behavior and changing the broader ecosystem with which they both interact takes a long time. And there has to be a compelling value proposition for all parties. And I think, as Marion articulated, it takes time to pull that value proposition together. And it's definitely a case that every consumer, every merchant deserves choice, but you need the right choices and the right set of features and benefits that make a strong value proposition for all the parties. And until those come along, it will be a long haul. It's not a sprint. It is a marathon.
You can say that again, but I want to stay with what you just said, because it absolutely takes time. It is taking time. And we need that choice to be articulated and understood. Who's the advocate behind this, other than the regulator and the regulatory bodies? Is this something that you're seeing as a banker, it's benefiting your organization? Who's pushing for the adoption of this?
I think I remember going back to probably around 2014, 15, being in a room back in my days with PayPal, being brought together with various banks when they were starting to talk about the idea of open. And there was definitely that point in time, there was definitely an intention to make it easier for small banks to compete with the bigger banks. And that was how it started. So that was the original impetus behind it. I think that has morphed over time to be something that enables just greater choice across the ecosystem. So I think there's a lot of different organizations that are advocating for it, including NatWest. There are a lot of great applications of open banking and open everything across the banking ecosystem. But as you can tell from the sponsors, there's a lot of fintechs as well that are also backing the idea of open and can see business models in it. And there are merchants as well that could see the benefits of having viable alternatives to sit alongside the traditional card rails.
Which is a very interesting headspace, because the banks I was working with when the journey started largely felt that this was happening to them, that this was a regulatory shift that we had to comply with, do the absolute necessary, which was not a light touch engagement, but the commercial value, the real value, other than we have to do this, wasn't seen. NatWest, on the other hand, has really lent into this. Can you give us some examples to bring it to life?
Yeah, I wasn't around with NatWest when this journey started, or when the marathon started. But I do know that NatWest saw this. There's lots of things in the banking world where you feel like you're being told to do things, and the open banking mandate would have been viewed by many as one of those. NatWest took a different approach. We didn't sit here like sullen teenagers and go, really, do we have to do this? We said, okay, let's embrace it. There's commercial benefit in it, and we saw that it was a long game and something we wanted to be in. So we have been an active participant in it. We've done far more than just the mandate. We've developed our own proprietary PISP, Pay It, and we've developed a whole range of partnerships with many other PISPs as well, because the very fact of it being open means that you have to participate in the broader ecosystem. So we've got various initiatives, and across various customer journeys, we've looked where it's good or useful or provides a better outcome from the customer or for the bank to implement open banking, open data journeys. and we're continue to actively talk with all of our merchants. As the largest commercial bank in the UK, we've got a very large estate of customers of all different shapes and sizes, some of which are in the room today, and you've heard from that can see benefits from implementing open banking into various parts of their processes, whether it's taking funds in or whether it's paying out.
There are a couple of things you said that I want to unpack a little bit. The first one is, as you say, it came in. Some of the banks did sit on their hands like a sullen teenager. Others did not. But there was, at the early days of the conversation, an understanding that it's there to protect consumers, to give choice. But particularly in the context of the UK, the sullenness focused on the fact that it wasn't clear what problem it was solving, particularly with the payments ecosystem being mature, working fairly well. Do you think that was a fair assessment, that for a while it wasn't really solving a particular problem?
I think that was a fair assessment, and I still think now if we went out onto Kensington High Street and asked anyone what they thought about open banking, they'd look at you rather blankly. So when we look at other alternative payment methods that started off as alternative and have since become relatively mainstream, they did a very good job of explaining themselves. And at the heart of it, if you have a strong value proposition, you don't need to explain yourself because it becomes obvious to the customer and obvious to the merchant. And I think open banking has got still part of that marathon. It's got a good few miles to do in terms of explaining itself much more clearly, such as developing a standardized payment mark and a standard set of communication. The experiences by bank are very different. Which is right, because each bank is different and has different digital journeys, but just the way it's explained to a consumer and to a merchant is inconsistent.
To steal the example Marion used earlier, everyone uses Uber, largely not understanding what the handshakes are between the providers in the chain or what it is about the capability that is different. Does the consumer need to understand what comes with open banking to benefit from it?
I think consumers want trust, and merchants want certainty as well. So I think all payment methods and experiences need to be understood in fine detail. And many of you in the room are in the business of selling payment contracts know that you're coming out with multiple pages of tiny size 6 font, and you're hoping that no one reads all of them.
Yep.
But that's because there's a lot of detail behind it. So I think it's important that there is that transparency, there's trust, because it's trust that is behind a lot of payment methods. I said I spent 11 years doing the PayPal scale-up journey, and the number one part of the value proposition was trust and security and simplicity. But if you don't trust something, you won't use it.
Particularly when you have alternatives, I think that is a key aspect to what you've said. But I want to go back to your very valid point that this is a marathon, and actually most of the participants, particularly the more traditional institutions and the regulators, expected it to be a marathon. But also, as you pointed out, in this room and elsewhere, a lot of the more active, more enthusiastic participants have been younger entities that saw an opportunity to create a business proposition based on the new regulation to allow ourselves to see that variety and diversity. What does it mean for these businesses that it is a marathon? Because we are beginning to enter a nuclear winter period in terms of funding. And if that growth period is slow, what does it mean for the ecosystem?
I think it means you need to be fit for a marathon. It's a certain type of training and a certain type of discipline. And there'll be, as in all sectors, there are organizations that are quick out the gate to start with but never quite finish the race. And there'll be some consolidation along the way. And we've seen that. And that's just natural in the fintech space. So that's not unusual. I don't think it's specific to open banking. There'll be ones that play the smart long game, and there will be ones that spend a lot on large stands at big events and aren't there the following year.
Yes, and sadly there has been quite a lot of that. Arguably, they should have expected it. Does it change the dynamics for a player such as yourselves, that the ecosystem will simplify, the noise perhaps will die down? Does it change how you see the space, and does it change the question of choice that you raised earlier?
I don't think it changes it, but as and in a bank or any large organization, you make investment decisions each year. There isn't a limitless pot of cash. So you prioritize, you make choices. And you look at the things you have to do, and you look at the things you'd like to do, and you make an assessment of how quick the market's moving, and you place your bets in different places. And some of your bets are your bets for the following year, some are for 5 or 6 years out. As I said, open banking is one of those ones where we need to place, and I think you step back from open banking, as Marion said, it's open everything. You place bets along the way, and you place some of those bets that you know aren't necessarily going to pay back for maybe 10 years.
And as you already said, commercial benefit needs to be key. It's not just a regulatory ask, although it is definitely that. Are you finding that inside the more traditional sides of your organization, articulating that commercial benefit is a challenge, or have people found their sea legs, so to speak?
I think when you're in a large organization, you have multiple propositions and multiple business lines. As I said, they're all competing for investment. And so you have to do a good job of resetting understanding of propositions and products, and make sure that you're constantly selling internally as well as externally. So it does make it, does mean that just because something got invested in last year doesn't mean it'll get invested in the following year and the year after.
And when we're talking about investment, obviously, when we started this journey, particularly for the established institutions such as yourselves who had ongoing concerns, profitable businesses, existing systems, has the balance of investment, because we have to, because there is a regulatory framework, translated to this is now a profitable business, or are we still in the learning, complying, and designing the future phase?
We're definitely, I think, as an industry, the open industry is definitely still in the learning phase. For me, there are obvious areas where there are clear benefits, and it's a no-brainer to be implementing open banking as it is now. And there are other areas where you say, actually, we're not, as Marion articulated, where it's not quite fit for that purpose yet. And there are various things that need to fall into place, or be made to fall into place, or will naturally fall into place if there's a value proposition. But it's not, I say to my team, we don't need to push water uphill. There are plenty of opportunities where open banking will create a better outcome for the consumer or for the merchant or for the bank. And we need to find those use cases and drive to those outcomes, rather than trying to fit a means of payment or a means of technology to something which may not be appropriate for it at that point in time.
And can you bring some of those examples to life for us?
Yeah, I think the obvious things, we talked about HMRC, that's the live use case, but also we've got many credit card companies in the UK use open banking to make it easier for their customers to settle their balances each month. That makes it easy for the customer, it makes it easy from a reconciliation perspective for the credit card company. HMRC, those of you that paid your tax bill, remember paying your tax bill in the old days, trying to find the right account to pay into was a nightmare. That's now much simpler. There are other cases where it's paying a bill or paying for a service you've already had. There are P2P use cases where it currently exists within the NatWest app and many other banking apps. You can generate a QR code so you can pay a friend more easily or request payment. And the same goes for small businesses. So e-invoicing. Lots of things where anywhere where you were sharing your account number previously, your sort code and account number, those use cases should be wiped out by open banking, by a good open banking journey. So they're the obvious ones, and the more you look, the more you find cases like that. I've got a good colleague of mine who regularly gets the train down to London, and the trains are regularly delayed. Delay repayment, great use case for open banking payments, payouts, makes a lot of sense. Instant payment, not having to share your bank details with somebody.
When we were starting to get ready for this conversation, one of the things you said is the commercial benefit has to be there from the start, but for any organization, you have to start small first, which of course makes absolute sense. You have done more than that. There are some laggards, though, in the market, and I'm not going to name names. Are you seeing that as a competitive disadvantage for them? Or do you think that actually the marathon is slow enough that everyone will catch up and this will be the new normal?
I think it depends, Leda, you're referring to, if you're referring to the banks or to the broader ecosystem. I think the banks know clearly what they have to do, and some of us are going further to make sure that we're not just doing what we have to do, we're positioning ourselves for a good commercial situation over a long period. I think we'll see today there's lots of fintechs who are active in the market out there, finding use cases and generating use cases, and are working really hard at that. You've got to take a lot of admiration for that, and I've been there and done that with my PayPal hat on in the past. And you need, as part of that, you need a couple of flywheel merchants, big names that have got genuine value propositions and can educate the consumer and create that volume and those use cases. And then I think you've got the broader ecosystem. When we start to talk about open banking being a credible alternative to cards, sit alongside cards, there's a whole ecosystem outside of the merchant and the consumer landscape that enables payments, starting with the likes of Apple and Google Pay, that effectively are the initiation point for payments these days, all the way through to the PSPs and the commerce platforms. They all play a part in enabling the payments ecosystem. So they all need to want to do something, either have the mandate or the commercial reason to participate in open.
Is it an exercise in creativity, though? Because you did say, while we were chatting earlier, that in many ways the e-commerce world is not the most natural ecosystem for banks. It is a transition for many. Is it an exercise in creativity?
It's definitely from a bank perspective. Like I say, the e-commerce is not a natural kind of place for banks to be inserted into. Banks have spent a lot of money and done a great job of digitizing their experiences. But they were certainly present in the e-com world through cards. And as someone said earlier, cards weren't designed to be used on the internet. Certain experiences popped up that were designed to be used on the internet. The banks were behind the scenes on those, and still are in many cases. So we're disintermediated behind other brands. So open banking does provide an opportunity for the banks to engage with customers during e-commerce experiences, and to in a safe and secure and streamlined way. So I don't think it's necessarily natural, but it's not totally unnatural. And does it require creativity? I think it goes back to how do we drive adoption of open. That requires marketing and education, and it requires good use cases all wrapped around that. So from a creativity perspective, I think some people are probably trying really hard to create use cases for open at the moment, and at some point you have to go, really, that's pushing water uphill, and let's just put the energy and the investment into the genuine places where there's a better outcome for the consumer and for the merchant.
Which should be our rallying cry for many a thing. One of the interesting things about open banking is, as you rightly pointed out, there was a little bit of reluctance and resistance at the beginning. I think thematically we have all accepted that open everything is the way the regulatory winds are blowing globally. It is not a standalone pocket. The idea of open finance, open banking, open data is thematically the drumbeat of all regulatory bodies that are largely aligned. Mm-hmm. That said, the devil in the detail is not talking to each other. So every open banking regulatory framework in each jurisdiction that has implemented it looks a little bit different. So if you're a bank operating in a lot of those jurisdictions, you're going to have different systems. If you are a vendor, you're going to have to comply to different messaging standards, etc. I have worked with some entities that were kind of hoping that they could hold off implementing until everything was streamlined. That is absolutely not the case. Do you anticipate that we will see a second wave where there will be a sort of global standardization, or is that way too complicated?
I think it's very complicated. I think various countries and regions around the world are constantly changing and shifting. So the idea of this being deemed a top priority is probably slim. And there needs to be, if you think about global schemes where it has actually worked, or large regional schemes, there has been a a strong commercial argument. So there's been a commercial force that has been driving behind it, behind the creation of brands and schemes such as Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Diners, PayPal, a lot of the stuff that Alipay is doing. It's commercially driven, as opposed to individual governments getting together and say, let's do something which is good for cross-border payments. And those schemes that I've just talked about, to varying degrees, are available on a global basis. And that just helps, because the e-commerce landscape is heavily dominated by global brands, not local brands.
When the early open banking regulation landed in the US, I happened to be in the States with a bunch of very traditional bankers in the room. And at the same time as socializing the regulation, there was a piece of research that had been carried out by the local university that found that in their overwhelming majority, American bankers were very excited about banking as a service because they saw commercial opportunity, and very unexcited about open finance and open banking and all the capabilities that would enable it. The need for education that you rightly pointed out seems to be universal amongst consumers and our industry. And as we're coming to the end of the time we have together, I want to focus on that. This has emerged as an area where there's a lot of very deep expertise that has built up over the years, some very interesting use cases, and as you say, commercially viable, possibly more players in the ecosystem than the ecosystem can sustain, but that's part of the cause. And then out there is a very large chunk of the ecosystem not actively participating beyond compliance, and a staggeringly large chunk of consumers who don't even know what the benefit is for them. It is a very uneven terrain, which is, again, part of what a marathon would look like. What obligation do we as a community have in terms of educating each other and the consumers, and who should be driving that effort?
I think it comes back to whoever's got the commercial desire for it. Payments need to be trusted, they need to be simple, and they need to be fairly priced. And payment fees are relatively small, so there isn't that much to go around. And I remember being in the room with, probably going back now at least 15, 16 years ago, with the telcos, when they all thought that they were going to dominate mobile payments. It didn't pan out the way they expected. So I don't think there's one body that's got responsibility for it. I think it takes a village, and it's typically driven by a good consumer outcome, and a number of organizations will then rally around that and make that happen. But I do think now it's much more difficult for that to happen, because the ecosystem is a lot more complicated, and the ecosystem is global as well. So if you are a part of the payments ecosystem, you will be looking to implement experiences which you can cover large parts of the globe, not just one country. And so whilst the open banking schemes all look slightly different, I think it will be difficult. It will be part of the treacle that open banking will need to wade through. But I'm confident that it will find, like water, water will run downhill and find its way into the places where it should be. And I think open banking can do that, and that's what the community can do, is make sure that it's not pushing water uphill. It's furthering the use of open in the places where it genuinely creates a better consumer outcome and a better merchant outcome.
That should be on T-shirts for this event for the next year.
Quite a big T-shirt, yeah.
Well, it can be shortened to, if the primary question is open better for this particular use case, then you're onto the right one. But everything you're saying points in the same direction, which is this is not going to be wheeled back, this is not going to be rolled back, this is relentlessly, yet slowly, the direction of travel. Now we have a mix of folks in the room, and some are sitting in less established entities whose entire business is around open banking. What would be your advice to them as parting words, because we are close to time?
It would be the same as I've just said. Make sure that your prospect list, your target lists, and your product folks are focused on where there's a genuine better consumer outcome or merchant outcome. And if that strong value proposition isn't obvious to you, then get your teams to pivot appropriately.
There should be the rallying cry, is open actually better? I am very, very excited to see what you guys will do next and to see how this particular ecosystem will develop. I'm not holding my breath. I was told not to expect a stampede 10 years ago, and it has been true, but it has a very steady, directional consistency. And it is great to see organizations such as yours actually leaning in, because it does color what we expect to see. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leda. Thank you, Mark. That was fantastic. Well done. Thank you.